thank you for that speech. I now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to give here.
I think in general, the vast majority of people always believe that whatever their family is doing is something that's good, is something that's normal, is something that benefits the most majority of society. I think this is the point where it becomes very harmful when this type of indoctrination and this type of mindset comes to play into politics. I'm going to do one rebuttal that doesn't fit in with my arguments, and that is that whole idea of sons and daughters to try to fulfill the legacy of their fathers and their parents or what they left behind. So the first response to this, I don't think this is true, because A, most people will just get into the politics because your father was a really good minister or a really good prime minister. Yeah. I'll prove this later on in my speech also. And the second reason is because you're always going to pressure that person into trying to do their best to their father. Even if your father was the best prime minister in Malaysia, you're always going to pressure that individual to become the best prime minister in Malaysia. This is very harmful. When you put all the weight of that person into that person because his father has a legacy, this is where he's going to really screw up most of his choices, right? This is where he's going to feel a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, that he can't actually rationally think properly before making the choices that do benefit society or can harm society. No, thank you. I'll move on my arguments. All other rebuttals will be integrated in it. So, the first argument: how the political system is one that's unjust and cannot solve the problems that any country will face. So, the first level of analysis to this is that oftentimes a lot of people always look up to their family members. This means people will always feel that whatever their father is doing or whatever their mother is doing is something that's okay, is something that's fine, is something that benefits society. You will always believe that whatever your parents is doing is something that's okay, is something that's good. So your family members always seem as the best people, and you're very likely to trust them because you're always indoctrinated as a child into thinking that your parents are the best individuals in the world, your parents are doing the superior good, and this is where it becomes harmful. Because even if so this is where it becomes harmful. Because Abdul Razak didn't even give many proper benefits towards feminists, and he doesn't actually give a lot of attention towards these females. Therefore, we also believe that that's why Najib doesn't do it either. Because Najib as a prime minister always believes that if Abdul Razak didn't do it, that means there's no actual urgency to do it into society. Therefore, you're always going to follow the political ideas that Abdul Razak is doing. You can't garner the most significant change under the side of opposition. No, thank you. The second level of analysis is how these people always have the same ideas as their past family members. So when you look up to them and you believe that they're good, you're always going to follow their beliefs and their ideas that they want to put on the table. So if someone gives you if your father tells you that this is correct, even though it might be something that harms the minority of the minority, you're always going to believe that that's something that's good. Therefore, you're always going to put this as your political idea and put it on the table, as you always think that this is something that's good, because you always look up to your parents as the best type of individuals. But before that, sure.
Even if you as a successor to your father or do things to your father think they're right, there'll be other members of the political system who will contest your ideas and challenge you.
Okay, so that's correct, right? But I think your position, if you get elected in, is the position that weighs the most, is the position that can overturn other members of politics. Yeah. I think therefore that position is something that you shouldn't play around with. You shouldn't get any form of small check and balances that other people can also stop you. I don't think that's significantly fair for you to say and to do so. The third level of analysis is that how people on the ground is more likely going to trust you and elect you as president. So the first version of this is that if your father was a good prime minister, people on the ground will believe that you can do something as well as that. People on the ground believe that you can become better than that. Therefore, they're always going to believe that you are going to be the best type of minister because they lack the understanding and they lack the education of voting. Therefore, we believe that more uneducated voters that come into politics that vote for wrong people even though they don't actually know the principles behind them doing so, I think that's harmful. The second thing is that they believe that you know the most amount of politics and they believe that you're the one that's good for the nation. This is harmful because even if your son or daughter isn't actually politically correct and he is going up for president or going to become the prime minister, this is where people on the ground believe that he actually is because his father or his mother was actually a prime minister. Therefore, even if you don't actually know politics that well, you're very likely to get into the seat because your parents were the ones that were popular and your parents are the ones that influence the most majority of people on the ground. Because you need to recognize that a lot of people are dumb. A lot of people are irrational. Therefore, if you make it so easy for them to just say, your father was a really good person, I think you can be a good person too, therefore they're going to vote for you more, they're more likely going to vote for you. This is very harmful. Leads to the fourth level of nonsense. No, thank you, Daphne. So, what's the harms of your same family members who join politics, right? I think this is something that's very unjust. No doubt the same ideas also exist. It also blocks the path of other people that want to come up into politics. Because even if you don't have any family members that are good, you're more likely going to not get that seat because your friend who has a father in politics is more likely going to do so. Even if you have better ideas and your political ideas are more correct and benefits the large majority of society, they're always going to pick that person because they feel that that person can garner the most amount of change, which is completely untrue. More people are going to put you in power as you are the tool of you being the best the best version of your family, and you can benefit the most amount of people in society. Other people cannot make their way up because you're always going to block them from doing so. Your family is the one that's going to continue the legacy of ruling the country or ruling the state or whatever. So what's the impact of this? I think when more people get into politics, therefore you have the same amount of ideas. When you have the same amount of ideas, you can't garner as much change as what we can garner under the side of government. When we have more people that want to make this change and want to benefit more of society, this is where it's very correct for us to ban these people from coming into politics. When you come into politics and you are as a family member or someone that's popular or someone that's very influential, this is where you can't have the different ideas as they can have, and your ideas are oftentimes going to be somewhat similar and not going to benefit the large majority of society. The second impact to this is that lesser people are going to come into politics, therefore you have a smaller spectrum of political ideas and you can't benefit a lot of people in society. Maybe you do get to benefit the society, the majority, but then you will harm the minority because your political ideas aren't always the best ideas and aren't always correct. So people, I think when there's more people in politics, therefore you get to attack the issue in many different angles and many different ways. Therefore, you need more people in politics. If you want a world where the country can actually grow and we can actually garner change, go inside, Gauri.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
what we need of an opposition in this debate is for them to tell us how all of their harms are exclusive to political dynasties. We think that oftentimes a lot of what they say, if you look back at your notes, can also apply to populist politicians or just parties that in Barisan National that have some sort of monopoly in the market. Speaker, we think 1MDB would have happened regardless of Najib because they have that power just by virtue of being that high up and being corrupt. Alright, I'm going to do a few things in my speech. I'm going to give you 3 rebuttals and then 1 argument which also has some rebuttals integrated into them. Things that don't fit in, right? So, Tanish's response to accountability was literally, politicians are stressed, therefore they shouldn't be in power because there's a high expectation towards them. Look, this applies to any single politician, right? But we don't think this is true because we think these people are generally qualified to be politicians because they've had exposure to what it's like to be in the political scene when their families were there before. They understand policy making, they understand things like transition periods that maybe the average person really won't. The second thing, this whole idea of indoctrination, he wanted to say, and this is a contradiction, right, that Abdul Razak didn't really do a lot. Firstly, we reject this premise. Abdul Razak recognized what the minorities wanted. He did that whole Abdul Razak treaty where that ended up to vernacular schools and made a lot of minorities happy in the past. He also really improved the healthcare system. So we reject that premise. But if you want to buy his argument, and this argument leads to people now think that you are going to be a better politician in the same breath because your father apparently was bad. Alright, I think it's only works if father's good, so that's a contradiction there. And then he wanted to say that people are dumb and people don't know who to vote for. Look, we recognize the constitutional right for every single individual to vote, regardless of their merits. This is why we let people vote. We think you should support a side that recognizes their right to vote, right? And yeah, more on this later on, like who achieves a better democracy and whose principles are better in this debate. Cool. And like lastly, right, this whole idea on the media being biased, and this is where we say there is no delineation between a political dynasty and any regular politician. When they said that Najib controlled the New York street lines, you know who else controls media? People like Fidel Castro and Xi Jinping. Literally dictatorships, right? Everyone was wary of this when Najib was controlling the media. When Najib, he did stuff with the Sarawak Post, and they took this into consideration when they wanted to vote for PKR, for the Pakatan coalition in the last election, right? Speaker, I'm going to deliver 2 things in my speech. The first, who achieves a better democracy? There was no response at all from the principle that came from Daphne's speech on how, by virtue of being a citizen of the country, by virtue of not being in the conditions in which you are not allowed to vote and not recognize the citizen as not recognize the constitutional right, such as you have mental illness, you're a prisoner, and like why you can't run for office then. Their problem is that you have power. You have power, the right to run. A, our side supports democracy where people have the right to run for office. But B, we need an opposition to engage with the principle because we allow people in some other forms of power to do things anyway. This is why my POI was important just now. Teachers teaching their children means that it puts their children in a more advantageous position. How is that different, right? And C, it's undemocratic to let people run if that person is a member of society and hasn't broke any social contract. We think this is really important, right? We don't understand by just virtue of them. Like, this is a principle and it's independent from any pragmatic outcomes. Please engage with it. Alright, cool. How we deal with corruption? Because they want to talk a lot about corruption. And this is why I'm going to defend it. The first, we don't think that corruption in itself is mutually exclusive. They have to prove why it's more likely to happen on our side, which they have not done. They have not provided analysis on why you are going to be more corrupt at the point at which you come from a political dynasty. Please look at your notes. This is very true. So we think at the point of which you climb the political ladder, you make connections to get on the top, and you actually do get at the top in the sense that you get some ministerial position or you become prime minister, then you probably have the same capital or the same capacity to be corrupt as the person from your political dynasty. We understand that being part of a dynasty means more connections and whatnot from the start, right? But first, we don't understand how it's different from any other structure in society. And secondly, we don't understand why this is okay to break the principle of democracy. Defend that. B. Okay, let's take on virtue of being accountable, right? So we heard the response before. You are less likely to abuse your power. This is really, really important. For the first, and this engages with Tanish's and the first speaker's idea of the perception of people. Everyone loves Mahathir's reputation. This is the reason why Mukesh Mahathir is held to such high standards at the point at which he does stuff. This is why, like Nurul Izzah and one Aziza too are held to such high standards because of what Anwar Ibrahim has done in the past. We think this is absolutely true. Every time Najib did something that was against his father or that was bad in nature, guess what the media did? They compared him to his father. This is really important, right? When you are constantly compared, your capacity to succeed or be better is more likely to accrue on our side. Because when you're constantly being compared, you're less likely to do things that are provocative. You're less likely to do things that are going to piss people off because you know that at the point at which you're doing this, you are literally harming your legacy. You're harming what your father did in the past, and you're harming whatever future generations you want in politics, right? You want your children in politics. We think that these are literally incentives to not do bad things. The second, we think there is a check and balance that naturally exists in politics. So this also engages when Tanish wanted to tell you that now no new politicians are going to come up in the world by virtue of there being a monopoly of a dynasty, right? Look, I don't think this is true because people will only vote for you if you give them what they want. If you do things like steal money, they will hold you accountable. They will scrutinize you. Please engage with this. That is to say, even if you started out, this is a comparative, even if you started out like more successful, even if you had the chance to make more connections on our side, and we're engaging with our worst case, by the way, then we tell you that at the point at which you're up there, you are still held by the same standards of accountability as anyone else. So in spite of being Dr. Razak's son, we think that to Razak's son, we think Najib would have existed in another form if Najib didn't exist at all, right? So we think Najib would have happened anyway. But this is also important, right? Because this check and balances mean that essentially the delineation between a dynasty and a regular person running for office is very important. When you're up there, you're going to be held to high sense of accountability. Speaker, for all those reasons, let political dynasties stay.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite Government Whip. Here.
Constantly look up to your father being an extremely prominent politician inside a great country. He has developed the country into unimaginable standards. Right? Once you grow up, you will always want to be like your father. That is the case coming from side of opposition. We think that's the exact harm that is the exact harm. Once you constantly are being compared to your father, once you're constantly being put to the same standards, you're less likely to have change, you're less likely to care for minorities, which your fathers never cared for. You're more likely to just do what your father did because that's the right standard. You don't care about the minorities that really desperately need attention, right? Two issues for you today. Number one, about the principle of democracy, how that is non-existent on side of opposition, and secondly, about indoctrination and how that's extremely harmful exclusively inside politics once you coerce everyone else, right? Firstly, democracy. We told you that coercion happens, and coercion is extremely problematic because it takes away your conscious right to vote for whoever you want to vote, right? We think, and they told us, oh, it happens anyway in rich people and in big institutions, right? We tell you that that is not like the same because we think that coercion inside politics is exclusive, right? Because if you're a rich person and when you benefit from being rich, it's like only you get the benefit, right? But once you benefit from your parents being a prominent role and a prominent politician, you benefit from it by having control over everyone else. We don't think we can play around with this, right? Because once the very fact that you're there is because of your father, not because of your meritocracy or because of your good policies, it's literally just because of your father. We tell you that it's an extremely unstable position. We don't want that to happen. But secondly, we don't think people want to vote for politicians just because they are rich. We don't think that matters, right? But I told you, it's the same with political activists, and people are smart too. Well, you can't possibly tell me that Najib got elected because people are smart, right? Obviously, people weren't smart enough and the only reason they voted for Najib was because individuals on the ground thought that he must be a good politician too because his father was, right? Which is proven to be untrue. Okay. Secondly, they didn't want to engage about how their side limit freedom of politics, and the sanctity of politics is incredibly diminished on that side, right? Because once you have an individual, irregardless of if this individual is good or not, you always take the spotlight away from every other politician out there. This is what Tanish wanted to talk about, right? We'll tell you that everyone else is less likely to garner votes because of their meritocracy, because of their actual policies, because those votes are taken away from them just because of their father being a very prominent politician, right? These individuals have to constantly work with a shadow of coercion roaming around with them, right? We don't think the sanctity of politics is it happens on side of opposition. Second issue about how indoctrination happens and how we deal with that piece, right? Before that, sure.
I think if it's true that if politicians that get in power because of their family ties are in fact really bad, why wouldn't voters just vote you out and make room for people who deserve the position more?
Sure. We don't think that's once you vote someone in, it's already too late, right? We think that after you have already voted someone in, because you have made that irrational decision because their father was a politician, we don't think that you can just simply vote them out because the damage has been done. We think that if you can eliminate that damage, they're completely fine with that, right? Secondly, indoctrination, right? We think that Tanish in my first Irfan already told you how you're constantly going to become the same person. Once you compare it to a pedestal, which is your father, you're always going to have the same policies that your father has, right? For example, right, Tun Razak never fought for feminist rights because at that point in time, there wasn't an urgency for it because he wanted to focus on development, right? He wanted to focus on schools and education. We think that that's really great. But right now, we're in desperate need of a feminist movement. We're in desperate need of representation inside politics. We don't think Najib fought for that. We think that because his parents were always fighting for development, he only cared about those things. He never cared about minorities who are being shackled from basic institutions. We don't think that garner change anyway, right? But then they want to talk about we can only ban people from entering politics if they are unstable, right? And they want to talk about accountability. We tell you that if there is family coercion that happens, they are unstable and they won't be accountable, right? Because what does this family coercion look like? Because once you're constantly once you look up to your parents, you have that bond, right? You have that bond with your parents. So regardless of if everyone says you're wrong, we think that you're always going to follow your parents, right? It's good if your parents are like great individuals, but if your parents are if Najib's son runs for office next time, we think that it's harder for that person we think that the policies that are there's not going to be a variety of policies. We think that those policies are going to harm people at the end of the day, right? When you constantly compare to your father, we think that you're only going to do the same things your father did. We don't think that has any societal change. We don't think you can garner any support, right? Let's look at their best case scenario. Their best case scenario is two things. Number one, people are smart, and number two, the child actually does well, right? And the family is actually smart, and people can call them out because of what they're doing, right? Let's look at the first thing. People are smart. Okay, people will be smart. We think that let's assume people are smart. Everyone is smart, right? And everyone has basic things like media and things like that. We think that underlying fact that you're voting for someone whose father has done great for you will always be that. That principle at the back of your head will always be there, regardless of what that politician says. Maybe this politician is going to be so harmful towards me, but because his father did something good for me, we think that you're more likely to vote for that person anyway. We don't think that can be eliminated regardless of people are smart or not, because that coercion is inclusive of everyone inside society, because that's that big of a shadow you have to live up to, right? Secondly, let's assume this child actually does well. We think that if this child does well and this child actually is great inside office, we think that it's unjust. We think that because you have limited everyone else's right to participate in politics, we don't want that person to run as prime minister, right? For all those reasons, MWS wins.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite opposition whip here.
So I have three things to go through in my speech. The first of which will be whether political dynasties do indeed detriment society. The second of which will be which side does actually ensure better democracy. And the third of which will be which side allows for change in politics. I think these are the three main issues we discussed this debate. So I think for the vast majority of their speech, they have failed to prove why coercion is exclusive. So for example, you have structures like the media, you have structures like populism, you have structures like rhetorical language, all of which are structures that can be perceived to be coercive, but we still allow them because they're ways in which politicians have to persuade their people. And politics in and of itself is much of an appeal to persuasion, and an appeal to the persuasion of ideologies. So therefore we don't see why there's any form of exclusive form of coercion that exists within status quo. And we feel that if individuals do wish to vote for individuals because they admire their father and they admire their father's policies, then they should be entitled to do so, because maybe those policies that their father did were things that people actually wanted, and things that their sons will actually fall up to. So you don't see why that is an illegitimate choice on your side of the house. But secondly, some analysis individuals, as stated by both of our speakers, are genuinely good. And we think that this is important because those individuals are generally good. And even though maybe they had a slightly easier route to go there, the meritocracy and politics of these individuals should be allowed to run for office and should be allowed to stay in office if the people genuinely believe that they should be there, because that's the way that democracy works. It works by the election of individuals who they believe should be politics papers. I'll take you guys later. Third, we think that this whole idea of an ideological system, the fact that ideologies are similar between individuals, is not exclusive to dynasties. So for example, if I'm from the same party as an individual, I'm likely to have the same ideologies, I'm likely to follow similar policies, I'm likely to continue similar long-term goals. And we believe that if you vote for someone in a dynasty or you vote for someone in a party, those things are more or less the same. So by that structure, you would ban people from the same party for running for office, because they're likely to have the same structure, they're likely to follow in the same way. Even if you argue that dynasties are more likely to have rigid beliefs in your family system, we still see that the way in which it externalizes its policy tends to be more or less similar to the way that parties externalize themselves. Because obviously, not everyone in an entire political cabinet is going to come from the same family, and you're obviously going to have to negotiate with parties, and obviously you're going to have some differences within policy which will account for change. But thirdly, we see that they changed their case halfway through their speech, throughout Deputy Prime Minister and towards Whip. We talk about how it's actually bad because politicians now become stressed and have to live up to a legacy. I'll take yours.
You have control over watching news. You have control over who you are friends with, right? You have no control over the coercion that happens with the politician's father. We don't think you deserve to be coerced by things you can. Yeah.
No, like, you're not coerced in any way because you still have the free choice to not vote for someone just because they're their father. You have the free choice to vote in any way which way you want. We don't see how that structure is. I'm not saying, oh, if his father's politician, we force you to vote for him. I think that's how it works. I think it's just that it's a persuasive factor, and we allow for persuasive factors in politics because we recognize that those things may be things that are important to individuals. We don't see how that's exclusively coercive. But moving on to the part where they change their case, I think it's important to recognize that A, if politicians really are too stressed, really are scared of bringing up legacy, they just don't consent to joining the political race to begin with. So like politicians can consent to joining the race, and individuals can consent to voting for these individuals, and if individuals are too scared to be politicians, then they won't run for office, and we don't see why the harm exists. And secondly, that harm is speculative on the fact that they can't run for office, and if individuals can indeed and are competent for running for office, then they will run for office, and if they are successful, that's good for them, and they should be allowed to run for office. So we don't understand why the harm is exclusive. And the only way you can regulate the this entire system which we talk about is through the ballot. So we believe that individuals have the right to not vote for individuals who are part of dynasties if they don't believe that these dynasties have fulfilled them in the next election cycle. And that moves straight on to a point about a better democracy. So they talk about how dynasties isolate newer politicians. I don't think this is true, simply because we see individuals like Obama, individuals like Macron, individuals like Mahathir, all of which were not members of dynasties, but were still able to rise up among structures which had existing dynasties. Individuals like Modi, for example. And maybe they do have a harder fight, and we will concede that, but that results in them being spectacular politicians, and results in them being spectacular dynamic politicians who appeal to individuals, which is that they're better politicians anyway. So the fact that you vote for people who aren't from dynasties, which those end up being better politicians and serving the people better. So even if you're willing to concede that harm, which we haven't conceded, it's still, even if you're willing to go in our worst case, it's still better on our side of the house. Sit down. Secondly, we think that partisan structures operate within a large number of people. So like not everyone's from the same family. So you still have moderation in terms of, you still have moderation in terms of how much control you actually have over the people. So to understand why they talk about this absolute sense of control which they try to push onto us on their side of the house. And they talk about minority suppression. I think minority suppression exists within all democratic structures because democracy is ruled by the majority. But secondly, we think that there are individuals and parties which are specialized to pandering to minorities, which will thrive if individuals on the ground genuinely believe that minorities feel protecting, because politicians are dynamic and are willing to respond to changes in society. And that's why politicians who are willing to strictly follow old-fashioned means tend to die out or lose out over time. And if they want to preserve their political career, they're going to have to be adapted to the people's needs, and they're going to have to be able to change, because eventually the idea of you being a glorified representation of your father is no longer going to exist very long when your policies don't actually affect people on the ground. Sit down. Thirdly, we think that it's kind of counterintuitive to say, oh, people like the damage already done, therefore people can't be voted out. That's not like a legitimate reason. I think my first response to that is, by that logic, you can't allow anyone who may potentially be bad to run for office, because by your metric, the damage has already been done the moment they're elected. I think this is unreasonable. I think if a politician does come in from dynasty and he turns out to be bad, he should be allowed to vote out. And election cycles happen relatively frequently. So we don't see why the fact that this individual can be voted out is a problem on our house. And secondly, he talked about how Najib and how people might vote for Najib and how Najib will end up being a bad person. Firstly, I think we put it clearly on our side that people who are in prison can't run for office. But secondly, I think it's also important to recognize that politicians are incentivized to appeal to people and they're incentivized to change with time. So like, for example, if Najib was a bad leader, I don't think when his son runs for office, people are going to now glorify him and say that he should be a good leader. If anything, they're less likely to elect him as leader because they don't know whether they recognize his credibility. So we don't see why that's like an spam on our side of the house. And thirdly, we think that, and finally to conclude, we recognize that politics allows for change. And politics is a dynamic system which requires you to change with people, requires you to change with needs, requires you to change with time. And we believe that everyone, by principle, which by the way that they have not addressed on their side of the house, should be allowed to participate in that system. And that there are sufficient checks and balances, sufficient countermeasures, and a sufficient structural system that allows for these things to be regulated. And since they haven't proved that any of the harms on their side are exclusive, we clearly win this debate. For all of those reasons, I'm very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite opposition reply. Here.
There's a reason why Jit placed his last issue as the change of policies and the improvement in politics. That's because that's not the biggest part in this debate. It is not our duty from the side of opposition to prove to you why political dynasties will make better policies or better changes in policies. But if anything, I think they are adhered to the same standards of politicians, where they will move with times and in fact pander to people, especially if the issue is as urgent as the side of government would want to play it. I don't think voters are willing to excuse crappy politicians just because of the family ties that exist. If the politicians do not represent you and the issues that you fight for, you're unlikely to vote them in, even if they have family ties to begin with. Two questions in which I'll explain why we won this debate from the side of opposition. The first, why it's unfair to limit political representation because of possible failure, and the second, on why there's a higher standard of accountability to politicians under political dynasties. On to the first question. So I think the first argument that came up from the side of opposition was very uncontended with to begin with. Because we firstly told you that the principal right for an individual to stand for office was incredibly important. Because this individual deserves to have the opportunity to represent people. This person deserves the right to be able to represent and directly share ideologies that they have with people. This means we cannot simply ban a person from running for office simply because he has more influence. I think influence is the key captivating factor of politicians. It's the way that you convince and you use your influence to convince people to vote for you, and you use your manifestos and promises to prove why you'll be a great politician anyway. But also, I think it was unfair for the side of government to constantly want to say that they will fail and they'll be the worst possible politicians in power, because I think that's unreasonable. There's a possibility that they will fail, there's a possibility that they'll succeed. But if anything, I think they're held to a higher standard and they would want to be better than their previous father in the first place. It's unfair to limit your political representation simply because you expect them to abuse their power when in position. But also, I think there's a huge mitigation that came from the side of opposition to tell you why it's extremely unlikely for them to abuse their power in the first place, which I didn't think had a sufficient response. We told you, number one, the point in which you're held to a higher standard is because because of your predecessor in the first place and your father that fulfilled these ones. If you currently can't fulfill the wants of people, then people are unlikely to vote you in. And this also means that it takes down your point about why you take away spaces from other politicians to be in power. Because if you're a bad politician, even with your family ties, people will just vote you out and make room for the next politician to take place. We'll concede to a certain extent that maybe that few years are wasted, but that applies to politics in general. We just have bad politicians, we see they're bad, but we vote them out anyway. And I think this is extremely important. But second question in this debate, what is the standard of accountability that we hold these politicians to? Because the only response to my argument about accountability was the fact that the politicians will get stressed out and they will perform badly. So the first problem we had with that is this. If your politician is so easily stressed out, then I think they shouldn't be politicians at all. And that was what we told you that was never engaged in essence. If you're so easily stressed out, then I don't think you should be a politician, even with the political dynasty that exists. But secondly, if it's true that they do mess up later on with their family ties, I think that's very likely for people on the ground to be angered by this, and they're more likely to vote you out because of the expectation that they placed upon you. And I think this is incredibly important because of the accountability that exclusively exists within political dynasties in the first place. You're more likely to be angered by the failures and the incompetencies of a politician, the point in which they fail, especially when their father has done way better and there are other politicians that can do way better than them.
Thank you for that speech. I now invite government reply. Thank you.
So there's some weird things that Jit and Daphne told you in their reply in Whip's speech, and I'm going to engage with that directly right now. So they tell you that if these politicians are always going to get compared to these people, this came out from Josh also, like they're always going to get compared to these people, therefore they'll always try to do the right thing and they'll always try to be better. This is where Amirul points out that if you try to be like your father, that's where you're always going to play the same type of policies that your father plays. There is no change that you can garner under your side. But then he also tells us, like Jit tells us later than in his speech, that they will adapt to these changes that status quo has and the problems that this happens. I don't think this is true. Because if you want to make all these policies, it requires you to be brave. It requires you to take some bullets from the people in society in order for you to do so. But your politicians will never do so under the side of opposition because they're always going to get stressed and they're always going to get compared to their parents. Therefore, they will only follow the ideas and their beliefs that their parents have and not going to make any change that occurs under side opposition. They also never engage on how the lot of arguments that me and everyone brought to you was completely unengaged also. The first argument we brought to you about how minorities will never be able to make it up the ladder. The only way they rebutted to this is that, oh, if these people are bad, then you just vote them out. You need to recognize that people will vote them in because they're parents of people. It's quite hard for you to just vote them out. Like election takes 5 years. Like all these things give importance for these people. So maybe you get to vote them out in the future, but it's still some suffering period that we don't even have under the side of government because of our policies. The third thing I'll talk to you about is which is better, having the widest spectrum of political ideas or having benefits that may or may not occur. Because the widest spectrum of political ideas, even if they are wrong, you still have so many political ideas that you can follow and you cannot. I think this is where it's more important when you get so many ideas and so many ways of accomplishing your goals and fixing the issues of your country. When you only have one person or you only have a person that thinks he or she is correct, therefore it's very harmful when you don't have a bigger spectrum of ideas. This is where you're more likely going to follow out those old-fashioned laws and rules that Jit wanted to talk about, and all those are going to be harmful because you're never going to actually engage in the issues and the actual problems that exist in status quo, because you're always going to get compared to your parents. Therefore you're always going to try to be correct and you're never going to get the proper benefit that side government proposes. The next thing we will talk to you about is how we get to garner a lot of change. The significant change that we get to garner outside the house never occurs under the side of opposition. They also never actually pointed out or actually rebutted this argument that I brought up to you today. Because actually, when you have the same person of your family bonds and your family ties, he's never going to make a change or never going to make better policies for the betterment of your country. He's always going to stick with whatever his father or mother tells him. Therefore, you don't get to get the best policies and you don't get to get the widest spectrum of people that actually want you in politics and actually get to better your country. If all those reasons exist, then your politician that exists under side opposition is not going to make any change. Even if he makes some form of change, it also damages other people because he's someone that's irrational and thinks that he knows most things, even though his father is someone that leaves a legacy behind. I think if you're always going to get compared to the best individual in your family, you get pressured. Maybe maybe the example of you wanting to do better than your father may exist, but it also brings a lot of significant harm towards it. You don't engage in the issues of status quo. You don't engage in the problems your citizens are facing. Therefore, you need the new mindset of people that come in from side of government to make the change in politics, to make the change in the betterment of your country, to make the change to make your citizens happier. I think with all those reasons, never been prouder of this.